And we are locked out. Major League Baseball is in a work stoppage for the first time since 1994. There is a freeze on transactions. The winter meetings canceled. The Major League portion of the Rule 5 draft canceled. And so, what does it all mean? How did we get here? What is to come? We're going to talk about all of that today. And also, how about free agency? It was a complete frenzy leading up to this lockout. So, we'll talk about the state of the free agent market and specifically what the Giants accomplished, what they did not accomplish in this market. So, all of that next on today's Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants Baseball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, now including YouTube as well, so check us out there. And coming up on today's show, the main thing we're going to talk about, at least the first thing we have to talk about, is the fact that Major League Baseball has instituted a lockout. So what does it mean? How did we get here, and what is going to happen from here? And then I also just want to look at the free agent market. It was a frenzy, as I said. The Giants accomplished some things, but also there's no doubt they're a worse team today than they were at the end of the 2021 season. So we'll talk about why and why I don't think it's appropriate to panic at this point, given that it is December. Of course, it's a very unusual offseason because of this lockout that has been approved by the owners, right? Okay, so to be clear, all 30 owners voted to institute a lockout. So it is the owners who are putting the players in a position where the players can't sign with any team. They couldn't show up to spring training. There's just the owners are locking out the players, freezing transactions. And the reason they're doing this is because the collective bargaining agreement expired late last night, and the two sides, the league and the Players Association, were not able to come to a new agreement. Now, this is something that we have suspected would be coming for a long time. Pretty much after the last CBA was agreed to 5 years ago, people have been expecting and predicting that this year would be a serious issue and that they wouldn't be able to come to terms. And basically, I'm in complete agreement that it's not looking good, and these two sides are very, very far apart. The players want huge fundamental changes to everything about the economics of the game and the competitive aspects of the game, and the league basically doesn't want to give up anything, and they want to keep things as it is now. So I want to just read a couple of statements from the league and from the Players Association, and I'm going to react to these statements as I'm reading them. The first one comes from the league. It's much longer than the one from the players, but I just want to read through it because I think it's important to point out what the league is saying. So this comes from the Office of the Commissioner of Major League Baseball, and it's a letter to fans. And they sent this out right after instituting a lockout, which they did at midnight, exactly 1 minute after the CBA expired. So Rob Manfred says, "To our fans, I want to first thank you for your continued support of the great game of baseball. This past season, we were reminded of how the national pastime can bring us together and restore our hope despite the difficult challenges of a global pandemic." Blah, blah, blah. As we began to emerge from one of the darkest periods in our history, our ballparks were filled with fans, the games were filled with excitement, and millions of families felt the joy of watching baseball together. All of that is just fluff. There's no substance there. Then he says, that is why I am so disappointed about the situation in which our game finds itself today. Despite the league's best efforts to make a deal with the Players Association, we were unable to extend our 26-year-long history of labor peace and come to an agreement with the MLB Players Association before the current CBA expired. Therefore, we have been forced to commence a lockout of Major League players effective at 12:01 Eastern on December 2nd. They're not forced to do it. They did not have to institute a lockout. It was a decision that they made. He continues, I want to explain to you how we got here and why we have to take this action today. Simply put, we believe that an offseason lockout is the best mechanism to protect the 2022 season. Okay, we hope that the lockout will jumpstart the negotiations and get us to an agreement that will allow the season to start on time. Again, okay. This defensive lockout was necessary because the Players Association's vision for Major League Baseball would threaten the ability of most teams to be competitive. Wow, inflammatory language, very extreme language. It's simply not a viable option. From the beginning, the MLBPA has been unwilling to move from their starting position, compromise, or collaborate on solutions. So it basically just continues in this manner where Rob Manfred just attacks the Players Association as being unwilling to negotiate, basically in good faith. So what bothers me about this is that they're publicly kind of really, really critical of each other, and it seems they're more interested in attacking each other's character and like the faith with which they come to the bargaining table than just trying to have some respect for one another and work out a deal. It's just ugly. So let me just quickly read the Players Association's statement. They said, quote, Major League Baseball has announced a lockout of players shutting down our industry. The shutdown is a dramatic measure regardless of the timing. It is not required by law or for any other reason. It was the owner's choice, plain and simple, specifically calculated to pressure players into relinquishing rights and benefits and abandoning good faith bargaining proposals that will benefit not just players but the game and industry as a whole. These tactics are not new. We have been here before, and players have risen to the occasion time and again, guided by a solidarity that has been forged over generations. We will do so again here. We remain determined to return to the field under the terms of a negotiated collective bargaining agreement that is fair to all parties and provides fans with the best version of our game we all love. And so I have very little confidence that these two sides are going to be able to work out a deal anytime soon. And it seems to me like a foregone conclusion that nothing is even going to begin to get done until there starts to be pressure with the season upcoming, like when spring training should be starting, when spring training games should be starting, when the season should be starting. That to me is going to be when things seriously pick up. And so I have concerns about the season. I have concerns about whether or not we're going to get a full season, let alone, what am I trying to say? I have concerns that we may miss games, and I have concerns that who knows how long this could drag on, potentially deep into a season. So it's that serious. The chasm is that wide between these two sides. So we'll continue this conversation in a minute, but I do just want to shift our attention to summarizing what has happened so far in the offseason for teams in terms of free agent spending and all that activity, and specifically as it relates to the Giants. So all of that next, but first, Bet Online has you covered all season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football season continues the march to the playoffs. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to our new desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code LOCKEDON to receive your bonus. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, yeah, as promised, now we are going to take a look at the offseason as a whole and how the Giants have attacked their offseason so far. There is quite a bit of, I don't want to say freaking out, but there is quite a bit of freaking out, I would say, among Giants fans because many of the top free agents have signed elsewhere at this point, including yesterday, for example. Marcus Stroman agreed to a new deal, a 3-year, $71 million deal. Max Scherzer has signed Robbie Ray, Kevin Gausman, Eduardo Rodriguez, John Gray, Noah Syndergaard. All of these players have signed and not with the Giants. The Giants did bring back Anthony DeSclafani, Alex Wood, and then they bring in Alex Cobb. So there's no doubt that they're worse off now. I mean, here's the thing. It is possible a guy like Alex Cobb, based on some of the stuff that he was able to do in 2021, some of the peripheral numbers, he could match the production of a Kevin Gausman. I am just like in a 1-year situation. Like next year, if we look at the final numbers, and I said this with Bumgarner and Gausman in 2019, 2020, and got a lot of pushback. So before anyone pushes back on me about how that's an insane statement, look at what ended up happening with Madison Bumgarner. That's the thing. Long-term deals for starting pitchers have a history of not working out, and specifically for the Giants, too. I mean, if we look back at all the deals that they've given to starters that have been like 5 or more years, name me the last 3 that worked out really well. Like, it's hard to come up with even one. There are some, but there's for every Jason Schmidt, there's a Matt Cain and a Johnny Cueto and a Jeff Samardzija. So I also want to look back at the last 5 to 3 years. I put this out on Twitter. Some of you may have seen of the top free agent starters, what they got, and then what that production ended up being. It's quite a list. It's quite an exercise to go down this trip down memory lane looking, because, for example, I'm not saying I just firmly don't believe the Giants should have signed a Kevin Gausman to a 5-year deal, but I am just pointing out, let's look back 5 years ago. Who were the top starters? Guys who may have been in line for that 5-year deal, guys who may have gotten a 5-year deal. And it's crazy to look at some of these names. It's like, what? That player? That feels like more like 10 years ago as opposed to 5. So anyway, I want to do that eventually, but let's look at overall spending in the free agent market this winter. And I also want to look at last offseason. We'll look at each individually and then combine the two. So this offseason, it has been quite a frenzy. Teams have already spent more this offseason than they did all of last offseason total, which is crazy. More in November than the total in all of last offseason. So the total is $1.98 billion spent by the league in free agency this offseason. The mean, the average, is $66 million, but the median is just $20 million. So what's happening there is that specifically the Rangers, but some teams at the top are skewing the average higher, and the actual middle point, the middle team, has spent just $20 million. The San Francisco Giants have spent $99.4 million in free agency. Yes, Brandon Belt counts as a free agent because he was, in fact, a free agent. He could have signed with any team, chose to take the Giants deal, even though it was a qualifying offer. Just think of it as a 1-year, $18.4 million free agent contract, because that's basically what it was. But anyway, including DeSclafani, Wood, and Cobb, Giants have committed $99.4 million to free agents this offseason. That ranks them 7th in Major League Baseball. and second in the National League behind only the New York Mets, who have spent $254.5 million. So I just don't quite buy the argument that the Giants are being cheap. I understand that they haven't shopped at the top of the market so far. I don't know that they will. I also know that the offseason is not over. December 2nd does not mark the end of the offseason. In fact, it's just the beginning of the offseason. Now, immediately, some of you are going to be thinking, well, the market is what dictates when the offseason is over. Like because all these big names have signed, especially in the starting pitcher market. It's true. The top names that remain unsigned, Carlos Rodon and Clayton Kershaw. And I mean, Rodon, I think is a very attractive option potentially for the Giants, depending on his health. But besides that, it's kind of really, really thinned out, and there aren't too many top starters. It would have to be guys who might perform like a top starter, but aren't big name starters. On the position player side, it's a different story. There's a ton of really good position players still unsigned. Carlos Correa may be the very best free agent of all, and he's unsigned. Freddie Freeman, Trevor Story, Michael Conforto, Nick Castellanos, Seiya Suzuki, Tommy Pham, Chris Bryant, Kyle Schwarber, Nelson Cruz. A lot of quality players remain unsigned on the position player side. Chris Taylor, who I thought was a possible fit for the Giants, ends up signing with the Dodgers yesterday right before the lockout, so he's off the board. But there are quite a few good players still left. And so I said this yesterday, I'm not here to judge an offseason when it's December 2nd. It's just ridiculous because especially the Giants' recent history is that they've made a lot of moves closer to spring training as opposed to early in the offseason. So yeah, I'm not going to judge the offseason in early December. It's just not going to happen. But we can take a step back given that we are now in a lockout. So I actually don't have the individual data from the I do have the individual data from the 2020-2021 offseason. Wow, that was a little bit more challenging to say than I thought. Anyway, so not this offseason, but last offseason, teams spent $1.5 billion. So yeah, as I said, less than they've already spent this offseason. The average was $50.2 million, and the median was just 28. So again, the top teams are skewing up the average. The middle team actually spent only $28 million. The Giants last offseason spent $63.5 million, the ninth most in Major League Baseball and fifth most in the National League. So again, above average and significantly above the median, more than twice the median. And this offseason, they are at the median is 20 and the Giants are at basically $100 million. So 5 times the median. And again, way more than the $66 million average as well. So when we combine the two, let's just do that. The Giants, the average is $116.3 million. The median is $64.2 million. And the Giants have spent $162.9 million. So significantly above average, 2.5 times the median, and overall they are seventh, the seventh biggest spenders in Major League Baseball overall the last 2 off seasons combined on free agents. And so yeah, I mean, it's not number 1, it's not top 3, it's not even top 5, but 7th out of 30 teams in spending. I'm getting a lot of feedback that the Giants are being cheap. But if this is being cheap, I mean, look at some of the other teams out there, like the Cincinnati Reds, the last 2 off seasons combined have spent $4.3 million. $4.3 million. Giants have spent $163 million. We've got the Rockies spending $5 million, the Orioles spending $11 million, Cleveland 17, Pittsburgh 18, Oakland 23, Arizona 23, Giants again $163 million. So they're not comparable. It's not comparable at all. And then of course the Giants won 107 games after last offseason. So the results on the field speak for themselves, and I get it. People want the big shiny toy, but at the end of the day, it's about winning. And I get it, like entertainment value, you want to be excited. I totally appreciate that. But it's what winning is more important, because if you spend big on that big shiny toy, like Johnny Cueto was a big shiny toy in 2015-16, but if it just ends up being a bad contract, nobody is thankful for that, and nobody gives you credit because you made the move. They criticize you for making that move. So important to keep that perspective. So in a minute, we're going to talk about some of these top pitchers from the last 5, 4, and 3 years ago, and it's going to be pretty shocking who were considered the top pitchers at those times. All right, as promised, we are going to talk about some of these top starting pitchers from 5, 4, and 3 years ago. It is a really interesting trip down memory lane because it's shocking that these were considered the top starters at the time. I looked at, I looked at MLB trade rumors and who they considered to be the top starters at the time. I looked at the top 5 starters from each of those years and what the predicted contracts were. I really should and eventually will look at what the actual contracts were, but the predicted contracts, MLB Trade Rumors is pretty good at predicting contracts. But anyway, without further delay, from 2016-17, so 5 off seasons ago, the top 5 starters, I should say, if these guys got a 5-year deal, they would have pitched through 2021, so it would have just finished. And the top 5 starters at the time, ready for this? Number 1, Jeremy Hellickson. Number 2, Ivan Nova. Number 3, Rich Hill. Number 4, Jason Hamill. Number 5, Andrew Kashner. Wow. Only Rich Hill had any kind of success after that point. To be fair, it was a weak starting pitcher market, and these predicted contracts were in the 3 to 4 year range and in the $40 to $60 million range. So we're not talking, they weren't saying these are $150 million pitchers, but still, none of these guys went on to have any kind of success, and a lot of them signed, the type of deals that currently a Marcus Stroman would get, as an example. And so 5 years from now, when we look back at this class, are we going to be saying, wow, Marcus Stroman was just elite for the next 3 to 5 years, or will it just look like a bad deal right from the start? And as we move forward, there's someone who specifically to me reminds me a lot of Marcus Stroman, and we can see how quickly things change for this pitcher. So anyway, the next offseason, 17-18, so after the 2017 season, going into 2018, top 5 pitchers, Yu Darvish, okay, Jake Arrieta, Masahiro Tanaka, Lance Lynn, and Alex Cobb, actually. Cobb ended up getting a pretty fat deal from the Orioles. It didn't go particularly well. He was often hurt. And Yu Darvish, I would say, has ended up being a pretty fair deal. He was the top starter, and he has mostly performed like a top starter, even though he's been injured and inconsistent. Still, he has upside and ace potential. Jake Arrieta, though, was kind of a disaster from the start. The predicted contract there for 4 years, $100 million. Masahiro Tanaka, 5 years, $100 million. He had some success, but nothing like being worth $100 million. Lance Lynn kind of turned himself into an elite pitcher, so that would have been a good deal. So these ones don't look so bad, except Jake Arrieta particularly does look pretty bad. But then how about 3 years ago? So guys who had, if they had signed a 3-year deal, which is what Marcus Stroman just got, 3 years, $71 million, in this 2018-19 offseason, that deal would have just finished. But the top 5 starters, according to MLB Trade Rumors 3 off seasons ago, Patrick Corbin, Dallas Keuchel, Nathan Eovaldi, Jay Happ, and Yusei Kikuchi. Now, Corbin, I think, had a pretty good first year, and the Nationals won the World Series that first year. But then since then, it's been kind of a disaster with injuries and poor performance. And the predicted contract, and I believe close to what he got, 6 years, $129 million. So it just goes to show how quickly these deals can turn and become bad ones. And the Corbin one certainly looking like an albatross. And if we were to go to the next offseason, you can see that Strasburg also quickly became an albatross and a bad contract. The next one, though, Dallas Keuchel, 4 years, $82 million predicted. And he was pretty good the first year as well. He ended up accepting the qualifying offer this offseason, I think. And then he later signed, I think, a 3-year deal. But anyway, let's imagine he had signed for 4 years, $82 million. First year was pretty good. Second year was iffy. And then last year was a disaster for Dallas Keuchel. And to me, he's someone, if you look at the numbers, reminds me a lot of Marcus Stroman. And we have to remember, currently when we think of Dallas Keuchel, we think kind of washed up, not as good as he used to be, just overrated or just in the back end of his career. But at the time, people thought he was worth a 4-year, $82 million commitment. And again, if you look at the numbers, he was not a strikeout guy, a ground ball guy, and had a lot of success with run prevention. But to me, not necessarily the skill set you want to invest in past 30 years old and for long term. And so we see exactly why when we look at what's happened to Dallas Keuchel since. So yeah, I just never really got on the Marcus Stroman train. You can kind of fact check me on that. I've written it on Twitter a few times recently, how I'm just kind of iffy on Marcus Stroman. And it's mostly because there's just a ton of contact. And I kind of believe more in guys who can dominate and strike people out if you're talking about a big commitment. And, that is Kevin Gausman, though. And so if you know me, I have been talking about how I thought Gausman was someone the Giants would target this offseason and potentially bring back on a long-term deal. But then again, if we go through the list here, the power pitchers don't necessarily work out that well usually either. And so it's just risky in general. Jay Happ, Yusei Kikuchi, none of these guys ended up being really good signings. If you signed anyone to these contracts, you would have lived to regret it within a year or two, almost without fail. So anyway, I'm sure the Giants have much better data on all this and exactly how these deals work out for teams. And, it's appropriate that we're in this lockout right now because the players' position is that they want to be paid when they're at their most valuable instead of once they've passed that point. And so I'm completely on board with that. Someone like Logan Webb is at his most valuable right now. So he should be able to get paid right now, whereas the team can control him, keep him for the league minimum salary this upcoming season. And I think possibly even one more season. No, I think he's ARB eligible after that. But that's what's not fair. Logan Webb isn't eligible to really cash in until several years from now, when his value and teams predicting into the future will be yeah, we don't expect necessarily great things in your future, and so they don't want to pay him as such, because as we see when we look back on these deals, they often don't work out. But right now he's super valuable, but he's not eligible to get a ton of money. So that's the problem, and that's what the players are kind of fighting for, and I completely agree. I just think there's a lot of risk when you're past 30 and you're a pitcher and you're talking about multiple years for high cost. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to do a mailbag, so please come back for that and check me out on Twitter for the prompt at Ben Kaspick. Really hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, please hit that thumbs up button on YouTube and the subscribe button and all that good stuff. So thank you in advance. Thank you to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.